Hey guys, welcome to this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday. Now before we begin, if you're new to this channel, these videos are all about answering your health related questions. So if you have a question concerning your health, something regarding Chinese medicine, herbalism, diet, nutrition, or really anything related to health and wellness, and you would like our help in answering your questions, all you have to do is leave those questions in the comment section below, and we'll be answering those based on popularity, the questions that we feel are going to be the most beneficial to the group as a whole, and of course the questions that we are capable of answering. Something else really great about these videos is that every week from that comment section, we select one lucky person to win a free bag of tonic herbs or medicinal mushrooms. So that means if you would like to win some free herbs or mushrooms, all you have to do to be entered to win is simply subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't yet already, give this video a thumbs up, and then just drop a comment in the comment section below. And with all that being said, let's get to this week's questions. Alright, so getting to our first question. This question reads, what is a remedy for an oily scalp and dandruff? Okay, so both an oily scalp or oily skin in general and dandruff tend to be two conditions that are strongly interrelated. So you think that dandruff is a condition where the skin's very dry, and that is certainly a factor in dandruff. But what's interesting is that a lot of the times preceding dandruff is oily scalp or oily skin, and both of these conditions are sharing an underlying imbalance, which is abnormal functioning of the sebaceous glands or the oil glands in the skin. So obviously in the case of an oily scalp or oily skin, the sebaceous glands are overactive. They're producing an excessive amount of sebum or skin oil. However, in dandruff, what is usually going on is the downregulation of the sebaceous gland. So the oil gland is not producing enough of the sebum or skin oil, and this is leading to dry, irritated skin that leads to inflammation. And that inflammation or inflamed skin can actually cause an excessive turnover rate of the skin cells regeneration process. So in dandruff, the reason you see flaking is because the skin is actually producing an excessive amount of skin cells, where the skin is actually becoming thicker. And in dandruff, the flaking you see is a bunch of dead skin cells that are flaking off and flaking away. But in both these conditions, what's going on is abnormal functioning of the sebaceous glands, and this is caused by very simple imbalances, usually nutritional deficiencies and any sort of stress. So looking first at the oily gland, the oily skin, which usually precedes dandruff, usually what's going on here is there's an excessive amount of stress hormones like estrogen and prolactin. So as I've talked about before, the whole DHT theory, the androgen theory, that androgens are what cause oily skin and acne and hair loss, or things like hirsutism, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Actually, what's going on is there's an underlying excess of estrogen that's causing the elevation of the androgens that affect the sebum gland or the sebaceous gland. So in something like oily skin, yeah, you might see elevated levels of things like DHT or DHEA, but there's an underlying reason or cause for the elevation of these androgen hormones, and that is usually an elevation of estrogen. Whether that estrogen is accumulating from stress, poor liver function, the consumption of estrogenic foods, or the exposure to environmental estrogens. In either case, when estrogen becomes high or elevated in the body, this stimulates the adrenal glands to produce an excessive amount of not just cortisol and stress hormones, but also adrenal androgen hormones like DHEA. And this DHEA and the androgens act as a buffer to the stressful effects of estrogen and the other stress hormones. So in fewer words, the reason androgens usually become elevated beyond normal ranges is because there's an underlying stress that's acting on the adrenal glands. So this could be from estrogen. Excessive sexual stimulation can overstimulate the production of adrenal sex steroids, as well as excessive stress in general. So stress can stimulate not just the production of things like estrogen and cortisol, stress hormones, but it can also increase the production of androgens to try to buffer that stress. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because in treating oily skin, you don't want to just lower your androgen hormone levels. This could lead to adverse side effects, and it could leave the estrogen and stress hormones unopposed, making their effects more destructive in the body. So you don't want to just try to actively lower your DHT or DHEA levels. That'd be a bad idea, because it's not addressing the root cause, which is usually elevated levels of stress hormones or estrogen in particular. And so tying this into the oily skin condition, when the androgens are elevated, they do act on the sebaceous glands or the oil glands, causing them to overproduce oil, again, as a protective or adaptive response to stress. So if you have excessively oily skin, this is another way of saying that your body is undergoing some sort of stress and the oil is being produced as a protective mechanism to that stress. But obviously, too much of a good thing can be problematic. So what you're going to want to ultimately do is try to correct that underlying stress. And some very simple things might be contributing to it. For example, a deficiency in things like the fat-soluble vitamins, particularly vitamin A, vitamin K2, and vitamin D, and also mineral deficiencies like zinc have all been associated with excessively oily skin. And when you look at some of the primary mechanisms of these nutrients, interestingly enough, some of their mechanisms or major mechanisms is that they antagonize estrogen. So fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, like vitamin E, vitamin D, vitamin K2, all actually help to oppose and regulate estrogen, and even zinc has an anti-aromatase or anti-estrogen effect. So usually a vitamin A deficiency or vitamin D3 deficiency or zinc deficiency is going to be related to things like dandruff or oily skin in this case. So a lot of the times correcting these deficiencies can correct the problem. But in addition to correcting these nutritional deficiencies, you're also going to want to take a look at why you're running through these nutritional deficiencies in the first place. So a lot of times it's just that you're not consuming enough of these nutrients in your diet because you're on a plant-based diet. A lot of these fat-soluble vitamins and these minerals like zinc, you'll really only find in abundance in animal foods. So if you're on a plant-based diet or if you're just not eating a nutritious diet, this could contribute to deficiencies in these nutrients, leading to skin problems or oily skin issues. But also keep in mind that stress in general tends to increase your requirements for these nutrients. So for example, you might find if you're in the sun a lot that this aggravates your skin, either activating or triggering dandruff or oily skin. And this is because sunlight, although very protective, very beneficial, if you get too much of it, it's also going to increase your requirements and your demands for things like vitamin A. So in general, if you're, undergoing any sort of stress, or if you're, using up any sort of energy, you're going to want to replenish that with an excessive amount or an extra amount of nutrition. So my very simple tips for treating oily skin would be to correct the underlying stress, whether that's excessive levels of estrogen in the body, anything that's contributing to high levels of estrogen or overstimulating the adrenal glands. This could be dietary stress. Again, this could be excessive sexual stimulation. This could even be excessive sun exposure. So there's such a thing as too much sun if you're burning, for example, or just very simple nutritional deficiencies, particularly deficiencies in vitamin A and zinc might all be contributing to the overstimulation of the production of sebum, which is causing oily skin. And this can actually contribute to the development of dandruff down the line, because if the vitamin A deficiencies and the zinc deficiencies become chronic, then at that point the sebaceous glands aren't going to produce enough oil, and this could lead to inflammation and irritation, or in the case that you're producing too much oil, if bacteria and dirt are dwelling in it, this could also lead to inflammation of the skin, and that's really what dandruff is. Dandruff is really just a problem, an inflammatory problem where the skin tissue is becoming inflamed, and the response to that inflammation is the overstimulation of the skin cell production, which is causing the flaking and the dying off of that skin cell from the inflammation. So usually by correcting an overactive or underactive sebaceous gland, you'll correct both dry skin and oily skin. But also keep in mind that one of the major underlying imbalances that might be contributing to this is a thyroid deficiency. So the thyroid hormone is essential for regulating the production of progesterone. Basically, progesterone and thyroid are synergistic. If you have a progesterone deficiency, you might have a thyroid deficiency, vice versa. And both progesterone and the thyroid hormone are what are majorly responsible for not just the immunity of the skin and the immune defenses of the skin, but also they regulate the sebaceous gland. So usually if you're running into dry skin or oily skin, this is indicative of some sort of thyroid imbalance. But adhering to the tips here, correcting high levels of estrogen, the vitamin A deficiency, the zinc deficiency, correcting stress, these things would be very therapeutic to correcting or important parts of correcting and thyroid deficiency, which would in turn be very beneficial for correcting oily skin and dandruff. So in conclusion, both oily skin and dandruff or really dry skin are usually caused by abnormalities in the sebaceous gland, which are strongly regulated by things like vitamin A, by zinc, and by the thyroid hormone and progesterone hormone. And it's usually triggered by and caused by an excessive amount of estrogen in the body or some sort of stress that's burdening the thyroid hormone and that's causing these nutritional deficiencies. So I'd take a look at your thyroid, maybe get your progesterone levels checked. But on the short term, I would highly recommend considering increasing your intake of bioavailable vitamin A in the retinol form, which is going to be found in animal products. So try to get like 2 pastured egg yolks a day. Try to eat grass-fed butter or ghee, or eating grass-fed liver, which is going to have both vitamin A and zinc in it. And in addition to eating the grass-fed liver, herbs like Polyrachis black ant, Hoshawu, and oysters are all really great sources of zinc, which is going to be very beneficial for regulating the skin overall. All right, so taking a look at our second question, this question basically asks, what can I do for frequent urination? So this is something I've talked about, I think, in a video on its own. I think I have a video somewhere on the YouTube channel that talks about how to correct frequent urination and what's causing it. It might also be in an FAQ somewhere, so I'll try to find that video and link it beneath this video. Otherwise, to answer your question, one thing that people tend to overlook in regards to urinary tract health and why they might be experiencing frequent urination has less to do with the bladder directly, but more to do with actually intestinal inflammation. So people don't realize, unless they study something like Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, that the gut and the whole bladder kidney system are very tightly connected. And that usually what's happening in frequent urination, rather than just the prostate being enlarged and pressing on the bladder, is actually an underlying irritation or inflammation of the intestines and the urinary tract in general, which is causing the smooth muscle in the urinary tract to actually spasm. So what's really going on in most cases of frequent urination is not so much an enlarged prostate, especially if you know you don't have an enlarged prostate and you're experiencing frequent urination, is usually some sort of irritation or inflammation to not just the bladder and the whole urinary tract, but also the intestines. So these things are very tightly connected. The intestines are very close to your whole bladder. So if your intestines are inflamed and enlarged, this usually can spread systemically. Most of the times, if you have inflammation in one area of your body, it's somewhere else in the body, maybe less localized or less intense. And what I see most of the time in people with frequent urination is underlying digestive inflammation that's contributing to, again, the irritation of the smooth muscle in the urinary tract. So you might want to take a look at the health of your digestive system. If you know you have any sort of digestive bloat, if you're frequently constipated, or if you just know you're not breaking down and digesting your food efficiently, if you have heaviness in your stomach, if you have loose stool or, again, constipated stool, if you're gassy a lot, if you're bloated a lot, these are all basic signs that something's not working properly in the digestive system, and this will spread throughout the body and immediately affect the whole urinary tract as well. Keep in mind that all of these elimination channels, urination, defecation, these things are, again, tightly connected, and if one's not functioning properly, you can guarantee the other one's probably not functioning optimally either. So usually what's very beneficial for frequent urination is the use of powerful anti-inflammatories. So this is why herbs like nettle root are so profoundly beneficial for treating things like frequent urination. So yes, nettle root is a tonic to the kidney and bladder. It's specifically beneficial for prostate health, but if we look at some of the underlying mechanisms of nettle root and what makes it so medicinal, other than being an anti-estrogen substance, which is known to enlarge the prostate and that can press against the bladder, if we take a look at nettle root in general, it's one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory herbs. It inhibits the production of the inflammatory prostaglandins. It directly lowers the production of various inflammatory cytokines or chemicals that cause inflammation, like transforming growth factor beta 1, tumor necrosis factor alpha. These are all inflammatory immune cells that can, again, irritate not just the prostate, but the urinary tract and everything throughout the body. So this is why you see nettle root being so great for treating the wide variety of symptoms of chronic inflammation. So I usually recommend nettle root for anybody that is experiencing any sort of inflammatory condition, especially if they're running into inflammatory conditions in the urinary tract and in the bladder or the prostate or the reproductive system in general. So nettle root is going to be one thing I'd highly recommend taking a look at. Most people can benefit from taking nettle root in the modern world because of its anti-estrogen and anti-inflammatory effects. which are at the root of most health conditions today. So you're probably going to experience some sort of direct relief by implementing a couple teaspoons, maybe like 500 to 1500 milligrams of a nettle root extract daily for reducing the inflammation. That's probably what's triggering the frequent urination. But other than the inflammation, some common underlying reasons for frequent urination could be an aldosterone excess. So aldosterone is a hormone, a stress hormone that's secreted under stress by the adrenal glands. And one thing that it can do is actually deplete the body of its minerals, as potassium, sodium, magnesium, etc., and actually stimulate urination. So this is a sort of stress response to be frequently urinating. Your body is attempting to excrete something from the body, and one of the hormones that's driving this, again, is this hormone aldosterone. But interestingly enough, the exact substances that aldosterone uses up to handle stress are the exact substances that can help to lower its excessive production. So one very simple thing that can help is to replenish the electrolytes or the minerals in your body. So particularly taking a look at sodium or salt, maybe taking a look at getting in more magnesium, more potassium, taking in these minerals supplementally. So just taking a quarter teaspoon of salt when you're under stress or before bed or when you're first waking up can be very beneficial for lowering the production of aldosterone, which would in turn prevent frequent urination. So in conclusion, frequent urination is usually just one of the many responses to stress, or in this case, inflammation. And inflammation is usually directly connected to stress. Stress usually is what causes inflammation. So in regards to correcting frequent urination, you're going to want to correct these underlying dominant causes, the stress and the inflammation. And as I mentioned already, it's not just inflammation usually in the bladder and the urinary tract that's causing the smooth muscle to spasm, but there's usually an underlying intestinal inflammation that's contributing to or causing the urinary tract inflammation. So you don't want to just try to correct any sort of inflammation in the urinary tract, but you're going to want to correct what's causing that inflammation. And again, it's usually digestive inflammation. So the best approach for actually curing the issue would be to correct the underlying intestinal inflammation that's likely present, causing the urinary tract inflammation. So definitely check out our Perfect Digestion course for a variety of different resources, valuable information for correcting all sorts of digestive issues, quelling the inflammation in the intestines, which is going to have a broad range beneficial effect throughout the entire body, and usually will correct any sort of urinary tract or bladder issues. Otherwise, some things you can do anecdotally is to take nettle root on a daily basis, which will help with any sort of inflammation occurring in the urinary tract and the bladder in of itself. And if it is an enlarged prostate, it will help to correct that as well. In addition to that, I'd recommend taking a quarter teaspoon of salt, especially when you first wake up and before you go to bed, which will help to lower any elevation of aldosterone, which could be not just depleting the minerals of the body, but stimulating frequent urination. All right, guys, that brings this week's FAQ and Freebie Friday to a close. If you've enjoyed it and found it helpful, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Remember, if you're interested in winning some free herbs or mushrooms, all you have to do to be entered to win is make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't yet already. Again, hit that like button and don't forget to leave a comment or question in the comment section below. For those of you interested in learning more beyond this YouTube channel, remember we do have additional information and resources that you can find on our blog, our online tonic herb shop, and our online wellness academy, all which you can find in the description box below.